So you can, I think, start off.
Moreji is also here.
Yeah, I'll just take a look at the TASI channel here.
Yes, sir. Live streaming is on.
Yeah.
All right, Tony ji, all yours.
Or you want to do the introductions, or?
So you go ahead.
Okay, so
I'll
good evening,
spotlight you.
everybody. Welcome once again to another session brought to you by the Animation Society of India. We are very happy that Isheta was able to make time for us. And today we are coming in with episode 2. For those of you who missed the first episode, you can catch it on our YouTube channel as it has been recorded, as will this one be. So all friends of yours who are unable to catch us live today, the only difference would be that probably miss out on the opportunity to talk to Isheta live. But you can send in your queries if you do regarding any legal issues to the email address that we provided courtesy of Isheta. She has, very generously offered to provide legal assistance to anybody who requires, specifically in the media entertainment sector, and more importantly for artists. You can write into legal@tasionline.org. I'll drop the email address in the chat window as well. So today for episode 2, we have Isheta talking about contracts in the media and entertainment sector. I think this is a very, very important topic, because not very well understood by a lot of people. And that is what makes it all the more critical that we get an inside view on what exactly contracts are, what are the safeties that you should build in to your in your contracts, what's all the legal speak about. So Isheta, all over to you. And there's going to be an interactive session, so please do send in your queries as we go, and we'll pass them on to her. Those of you listening in on YouTube also can send in your queries, and we'll pass them on for Isheta to answer. So all yours, Isheta. Thank you.
Thank you so much, sir. So without any delay, since everybody knows who I am, so I will quickly jump into the presentation for today, and we can just quickly jump in and start the presentation. So just give me a minute. I will just share my screen, and then we can start. I hope my screen is visible to everybody.
Yes.
Okay. Now, Vaibhavji, I would require, sorry, Tasi, I will require a help of yours, which is I cannot see any questions in the comments or in the chat box.
Sure.
So I just request that in the middle, we will try and keep the questions for the end, but we can also take up if it is related to any particular slide, or if it is a very particular question, we can stop and take the question in the middle. Number 2, I'm trying and explaining things because it's a little legal and a little complicated. So I've tried and simplified things as much as I can. And I will slowly and gradually take you through the journey of the slides. At the same time, if there is any slide which is not clear, or if there is any pointer in the slide which is not clear to anybody, please stop me in the middle. I will again explain the pointers and clear the doubts. Okay. Now, so today in this second episode, we are going to understand. I'm going to demystify contracts. Now, contracts is something which is, I think, which is a very important factor in any industry, especially if we talk about the media and entertainment industry. A lot of the relationship between the parties, a lot of professional relationships, be it between an actor and a production house, be it between two production houses who are collaborating, be it as an employee of a production house or a consultant or a freelancer, wherever we see, contracts are there. So I will try to explain everything one by one, which will include meaning of the contract, different kinds of contracts which are popular in the media industry, the important provisions of the contract, what do they mean, what should you look at it when you get something like that. And I will end it with certain tips and tricks which will come in handy whenever you are drafting a contract or reviewing a contract, or whenever you get a contract to sign. Okay, so now Just one thing, there might be certain things where you might feel that it is going a little out of the domain of the media and entertainment industry, and I'm trying to explain or teach you the legalities of contract. But that will happen because there are certain legal things that anybody who belongs to this industry needs to understand and should know about contracts. Things like when should a contract becomes legal in front of the court, when is it an illegal contract, stuff like that. Okay, so
Great.
let's move on to our first slide. So the first thing, as you can see, is whenever you see a contract, be it a 5-pager document, be it a 10-pager document, be it a 20-pager document, this is the first reaction. This is how anybody who does not belong to the legal fraternity, this is their first reaction when they look at the contract. So the very first thing that we need to understand is what exactly is a contract. So if I try and define it in a simplest possible language, it is basically a contract is a promise which is enforceable by law. So it is a binding legal document which is mutually agreed between parties. These parties could be 2 or more parties. It involves either about doing something or not doing something for some consideration, which can be in terms of money or it can be exchange of services. So this is what a contract is. Now comes our second question: why contracts? Why do we need our contracts? Oh, let's say, just think, okay, you go and you want to act, a friend promises you that, okay, you will be the actor in my next movie. Okay, I trust the person. The producer is my friend. They will definitely give me a role. What is the need of signing the contract? Now, just think, in this situation, tomorrow you pick up the phone. This promise has been made, 2 months have been passed, and every day you're told one thing or the other. And then one day you pick up to your the phone and call your producer friend. Now, your producer friend says that, oh, did I do any such promise? I don't remember. Or they reply, I am so sorry. I cannot take you as the lead actor for my movie for whatsoever reason. So to avoid situations like this, you get into contracts. This is just one of the factors why you should get into contracts. I will give you 4 important reasons why you should get into contracts, and preferably and advisably get into written contracts. So the very first reason why one should think about having a contract is the fact that in the contract, a contract defines the roles and responsibilities of of both the parties. So whenever a contract is drafted, it clearly determines that, okay, this is what one party, let's say it's a two party contract. So a contract will clearly say that, okay, party A will do all of these things which are written out there. So party A clearly knows what they have to give, and party B, because party A is performing an act for party B, party B will give you, let's say, for example, 20,000 rupees for the acts that you are delivering. So we are very clear. The roles and responsibilities of party A is to perform these things, and roles and responsibilities of party B is, once the performance is done, the way you write in the contract to pay that consideration amount to party A. So we are very clear. Second reason why you should get into the contract is it gives you a clarity and somewhere protects your rights as well. Now, like we saw in the previous episode, how important copyrights and how important various rights of copyrights are for this industry. So when you sign an agreement, there is, most of the time, there'll always be a section which will be called as rights of the parties, or there'll be a section that will be headed as intellectual property rights. So under that section, all the parties who are getting into that contract will clearly understand that who has the right. When you perform a particular thing, for example, when I write a script, I take the script to the production house. Okay, now production house promises that, okay, we will make a movie on this production house. Let's sign an agreement for this. Now, in that situation, normally in the IP rights, it clearly says that okay, the rights of this script will belong to the commercial rights of the script will belong to the production house, and the writer will have the right to get credits in whenever a film or a web series or whatever is made. So every party knows their rights. There is a clarity about that. After the movie is released, there would not be a fight in terms of, oh no, how can you make a movie on this? Nobody has to prove anything because there is a clear document that defines what are the rights of a particular parties and how are those rights going to be protected. Things like you normally when there is intellectual property rights or when there are informations regarding particular rights involved in a contract, you usually in the when you make a contract of media and entertainment industry, you usually correlate it with the confidentiality clause, wherein you are in a way protecting the rights till the time it comes out in the public domain. And at the same time, in the IP rights section, you also mention that, okay, whatever will be, if there is some right that has to be assigned to one of the parties, then these are the documents that will be executed. And this is the manner in which rights will be transferred. Or at the same time, it also clearly states that, okay, the rights will be transferred as per the law. Or one party can have the rights only as per it is definitely defined by the law, by that particular law. So the second thing that this contract is giving is a clarity on protection of rights and avoiding any kinds of disputes. The third reason why one should get into a contract is the most important thing, which is consideration and payment time. So most of the time, a lot of times, a lot of us might have gotten into a situation where we have performed something for somebody and we did not get our remuneration, which was promised to us. It can be for any reason. It can be for the reason of, let's say, maybe the work that we performed was not as per the satisfaction of the other party, or maybe the payment is delayed because they are doing, we'll give it to you today, tomorrow. So to avoid all of this, a contract clearly defines the consideration, and it also defines the payment timelines and any payment terms which will be there. For example, normally whenever you have, and now the contracts that I'm talking about, I am focusing all of those to the contracts that are made in the media industry. So every time I say contracts, please understand it is mostly for the contracts, it is mostly the practice that is accepted for the contracts in the media and entertainment industry. So in these contracts, whenever a contract is made, the party who has to pay will always say that, okay, if the services has been performed as per the satisfaction of the other party, party A will pay, let's say party B is doing the service and party A is paying party B. So it will say that party A is paying party B this much fees or this consideration amount or this remuneration. It can be anything. So it is very clear that, okay, when we will perform the 3-4 acts that are mentioned in the contract, we are getting this particular amount, which is usually mutually decided between the parties. And along with the consideration, the contract also defines the payment timelines. Like it will usually say that sometimes it is the money is paid as a salary. So it will say that, okay, once you the salary will be paid to you every month or at within the first 10 days of the next month. Or it might say that the salary for every month will be paid in advance, or the remuneration for every month will be paid in advance. Or with regards to payment timeline, it can say that sometimes there is a need to raise an invoice. So the contract will make it clear that, okay, once you do the services, the other party will raise a acceptable invoice, and once the invoice is accepted, the payment will be done within, let's say, sometimes the timeline is within 15 days of raising of the invoice, sometimes it is 30 days, sometimes it is 45 days. So depending upon the mutual understanding of the parties, it is clearly written down out there. So you don't have to go back. Let's say you're having a relationship with a particular party for, let's say, for a period of 1 year, or let's say for a period of 6 months. You don't, every single month, you don't have to go back to the party to ask for money. You know that, okay, this is the consideration, these are the payment timelines, and this is how the money has to be paid. So we are clear on that part also. And the fourth reason is that it gives a watertight protection to any of the projects that we are that for which we are dealing with. Now, in the media and entertainment industry, most of the time we are dealing with assignments. Those assignments could be in the form of making a film, could be in the form of making an advertisement for someone, or maybe shooting somebody's ad for a day. It could be any relation. So in that situation, it is very important that you give a very watertight protection in terms of most of the time in these projects, the most important factor is the mystery around the project. It is very important when the product when should the teaser be released, when should the trailer be released, or it or सिर्फ इतना portion ही हमें public domain में लेके आना है. So this particular industry works on the mystery that is created around the project. And another important thing is piracy, which is a major issue in this industry. So most of the time, you try and tackle with all of these issues by a contract because there is a very strong confidentiality clause, which clearly defines the information which is given to the other party. It also defines that you cannot. It clearly states that any party cannot make any information public without the consent of the other party to whom the information belongs to. So in a way, it gives you that watertight protection that you need to make sure that the project is made. There is no controversy or dispute with regards to the project, and at the same time, you try and define those confidentiality goals also for the parties, and you also kind of know when the information will be shared and with whom the information will be shared. So you have a tab on that. So in a way, it is also protecting you from a lot of things. So these are the four reasons why you should always have a contract. And one of the most important reason of getting into contracts is to make sure that once you're in the process of creating something or in the process of making a project, you don't get into any dispute. Because before drafting a contract, both the parties will sit together, they will negotiate, they will decide on the terms, and those terms will be made in a document which will be signed by both the parties, and then the uh, conversation and discussion around the relationship is closed, and both the parties know that we are on the same team. This is the reason for which we are collaborating, and now we can focus on that creative project that we need to work upon. So a contract comes in handy, and trust me, it is something that I have seen over the years, that working for media industry, I've seen that clients who have a well written and a well drafted contract are always in a much better position to tackle with stressful situations. If there is any dispute, if they need any particular clarity, they just need to go back on that contract and things are ironed out. And at the same time, God forbid, if a wrong or a breach is done by any of the parties, the contract again comes in handy because you have a dispute clause in the contract. You know, if a dispute arises, how are you going to resolve it? So it becomes comparatively easier to deal with stressful situations and be clear that, okay, we have a relationship, these are the terms of our relationship, and both the parties know it. So most of the time disputes don't arise when you have a contract. Okay, now moving on. Now these are certain things. Now this slide is a kind of initially I was thinking to have two different slides for life cycle of a contract, basically how a contract is drafted, not exactly how it is drafted, but how do you reach, what is that point जहाँ पे हम ये बोलते हैं that okay, now we are in a contractual arrangement, and what are the essentials of the contract. So I thought, okay, why not merge both of this, because they are very closely interlinked, because there are certain pointers that should be there in the contract to make it a valid document before the court. So there are 6 important things. You can call it the life cycle of a contract, or you can call it the essentials of the contract. These 6 things are, if you can see on the screen, one is offer, one is acceptance, one is consideration, one is capacity, one is legality, and then genuine agreement. So when we talk about offer, offer is generally whenever you want to get into a professional relationship with somebody, you will always offer the party something. You will either offer your services, you will either offer to work for them, maybe to act for them. So whenever one party who wants to get into a professional relationship with the other party, whenever they make a proposal to that party, that is what we called offer. Now this is the stage one. Now when one party gives an offer, you can do two, three things. You can either revoke the offer by saying no, that okay, we don't want to get into a relationship with you, or we don't like your offer, or we don't need your services. So either you can say no. If you say no, the conversation is closed there and then. Or the second thing that anybody can do is they can actually give a counter offer. They can say that okay, these are the services that we need, but okay, out of the 10 services that you have told us, we need these two services or whatever. So you can always, the other party usually comes up with a counter offer if they want to get into a professional relationship. So that is usually, all of this is stage one. After this stage, you move on. If you're going towards drafting a contract, the second stage that you will reach on is an acceptance. So this acceptance is usually whatever offer has been made. There is an agreement. You have agreed that okay, this is the offer that you have made, and we are accepting this offer. Now, for this acceptance, usually the method of accepting a particular offer, if it is indicated or signified by the other party, you accept it in that format. If not, then that particular offer acceptance has to be in an expressed format. And when I say expressed, I mean you should either write it on an email that okay, we are accepting your offer and we can take this particular professional relationship forward, or you can confirm it over a call, over a WhatsApp message. But that acceptance, it is preferably in the practical world, we always say that always communicate your acceptance clearly. Do not be silent, or do not think that the other party would understand. Just clearly accept the offer communicate the offer that you are accepting. The third thing that you kind of, once an offer is done, when an acceptance is done, you move on to the next thing, which is actually drafting the professional relationship or the agreement that you have. Now, while drafting, the third important thing that comes into picture is the consideration. Now, let's say I am offering my services to you. There should be certain consideration for that offer. Now, this consideration could be anything of value which is promised to another person. Now, this value can be in monetary terms, or this can be something like a barter system, where I say that okay, I will perform this activity for you, and in return you can perform this activity. So let's say, for example, there is a sponsorship agreement. Okay, in that scenario, let's say one of the parties says that okay, I am doing a tournament and I'm going to give you give you certain branding deliverables, and in my tournament, I will have on my jerseys, I will have the logo of your company. On the back, I will have your logo of the company wherever I can put the logo, be it on banners, on t-shirt, on stumps, on badge, wherever. And in return, because I am allowing you to kind of market and publicize your brand in my match, in my tournament, in return, what you can give me is, let's say this particular brand that I'm marketing in my tournament is a hotel. So in return, you can let the players of the tournament stay in your hotel for let's say it's a 3-day tournament. So you can allow the players to stay in the hotel for 3 days for free. So it's a kind of barter of services. So this can also be one of the considerations, and usually this is how in the media industry, sometimes it is monetary consideration and sometimes it's a barter of service, or just an arrangement, a mutual arrangement between two parties where both of them do something for each other. The next thing that is important while actually drafting a contract or reviewing a contract, or maybe when the first stage of contract, is the capacity. Now, capacity is basically the capacity that the law gives. So basically, you should have a legal capacity. That is, let's say minors are not allowed to enter into an agreement. So most of the time, in case of minors, we enter into an agreement with their guardians. So as per law, you should be above 18 years to actually, you should be a major to actually get to give your consent for an agreement, which is another very important thing when it comes to making an agreement, is that consent is important, and only a major person can give in consent. Another legal capacity another situation where somebody will not be called legally, will not have the legal capacity to enter into the contract, will be uh, things where somebody has a mental disability. So if you can prove that a party has a mental disability, that is the time where their capacity to enter into a contract or to perform a particular contract ends. So the legal capacities is what is important. That is what I mean by capacity here. The fourth thing that is important is the legality of the contract. Now, just because two parties can get into a binding document, into a binding arrangement, does not mean that it can be for anything. Now, a contract can only be for legal things. You cannot make any contract that involves anything that is illegal as per the law of that particular jurisdiction. That contract will not be valid. Just to give you an example, God forbid somebody tries to get into a contract of drugs. You have a written contract wherein one party is delivering drug to another party, and party B is paying to this delivery. Now over here, drugs are illegal. Drugs are illegal in India. So any contract that has any such situations will not be valid before the court. So it is very important that you're getting into a contract only for legal things. The fourth and the sixth and the final thing is there should be a genuine agreement. Now, where by genuine agreement I mean that offer and acceptance should go together to form a genuine agreement. That is, a valid offer should be met by a valid acceptance. Certain situations wherein we do not say that it's a genuine agreement are situations like where somebody has either done some fraud, or if somebody has entered into a contract by misrepresenting themselves, or by mistake, undue influence, or any economic distress. In these situations, the agreement, the binding document will not be a genuine agreement. So these are certain essentials and life cycle of the contract. Now, any questions till now? Or is everything, I mean, till now we are dealing with basic things, but if there are any questions, we can stop in the middle and just talk about it.
I have a few questions here. Let me see if they make sense with what you have said. I'll just go by the norm that we follow mostly. I mean, with the artistic community, or the artist community, is a lot of things happen verbally, right? And then from that verbal exchange, they progress probably to maybe an email. That you're discussing all that you said, offer, acceptance, and consideration. All this happens via email. I send an offer to somebody that I need your services as a studio, or I need your services as an artist or as a freelancer. The acceptance is, sometimes it's not that yes, I agree. The acceptance is in the form of, okay, what will be the job requirement? What is the scope of the work? So it's basically discussing the project, which in a way is talking about an offer and an acceptance in the in between the lines. It's not very it's not very explicitly spelled out. So the question here is that, does this in its final shape, if you don't actually go on a piece of paper and say, I made this offer, and the other person says, I accepted this offer, then the first person says, for this offer, I'm going to, require this and this from you. And the second person says, yes, I mean, I will provide such and such too. All this is happening like, in the backdrop. It's like a subtle understanding that is going on. Now, does that get, in any way, does that get recognized as an enforceable contract, or do you need to have a specific piece of paper?
See, no, the answer to that question is that preferably, advisably, it is advised that you should have a written paper. But there is something called as an oral agreement. There is another thing which is called as an implied contract. Now, implied contract is a legally, if I try to define it, it is something which is a legally binding obligation that usually derives from the actions, conduct, or circumstances of one or more parties. So, in situations like these, wherein emails have been sent, and let's say you perform that service, sometimes it is like, okay, I need, for example, it is, I need you to write a teaser. Let's say I need you to write a teaser for the movie that I'm coming up with. Okay. Now, in this situation, it is happening on the email. Now, this person writes the script of the teaser, sends it back to you, and in return, you pay money to him. Now, this can be an implied contract. And in this situation, see, yes, it's a legal binding obligation that is happening between you. But in situations like this, it gets why I tell all my clients in the industry or whosoever I meet is to get into a written agreement, is because when you have a written agreement, you are covering it from all the sides. Whereas when you have such implied contracts, it becomes difficult, because it usually, in oral agreements and in implied contracts, it's usually what I say versus what you say, or the emails I send you versus what you can send me, which can be interpreted in a lot of ways. And you're just, okay, one person is just performing the act and the other person is not, and is giving, one person is performing the act and other person is paying you for that performance. Yes, a contract has been there, but let's say a situation arises where these two parties get into dispute. Now what? Where will we go? Which court will we go? Will we go to? Will we try to resolve it while talking? Is there any way any other way where we try to settle the matter? So things like this get into an unnecessary discussion and arguments, because like I said, it usually becomes what I say versus what you say. So yes, there will definitely be a implied contract when certain performance has happened or certain actions have been done. But again, it is always recommended to go by a written piece of paper. This is a very personal thing that I have derived over the years of working. That situations get a lot easier if you have a well drafted contract in hand.
Right.
It's always advisable. Yes.
Okay. Now, the other thing is that one other question that I had was that when you talk about offer and a counter offer, sometimes there is silence, and silence over a period of time. Now, when you say you bring a concept of legality into this, can someone say that you have X amount of time to confirm, otherwise it shall be deemed confirmed? Is that a legal statement? Legally tenable statement, so to say.
You can do that. Yes, you can do that. But then it comes in with a lot of confusions. And again, this thing has to be proved. Because a lot of times, normally, again, with regards to the industry that we are talking about, these things don't stand in court most of the times. Because just by offering something.
Isheta, sorry, can you pause the screen share so we can see?
Sure. Just give me a minute. I have just stopped it.
Yeah. Thank you.
Yes, I will go back into it again when we go back. Yeah.
Sure.
Yes. So I was saying that normally when you say that silence will be deemed acceptance, it is not usually accepted by the court, because there are several other parameters and factors that will say that, okay, because of this, we were not able to accept, or because of this. And normally the interpretation usually goes it only that this is just the offer stage. There has sometimes some of the emails also say that sometimes you can write in an email that, okay, I am sending you this offer. If you don't accept it, let's say within 3 months, I would think that, okay, just giving you another example, that, okay, I say that, okay, I want to give my legal services to Ranjit sir. And I write an email that if you do not say a yes or a no within 45 days, I will think that you have taken me as your lawyer. So in this situation, this is more like forcing myself to you. So it is a kind of forced relationship that I have made. So most of the time, these things don't stand in the court of law. Specifically, when we talk about the media and entertainment industry, there has to be a very expressive and clear acceptance from the other party.
So, I mean, this may sound a little foolish, but this begs the question that sometimes when you write, you make an offer or you send, let's say, an estimate or a quotation. Very often we see things written which say this is valid only for, let's say, 45 days or valid only for 10 days. Isn't that also in some way like forcing me to take an offer with the current days?
No,
Doesn't that run like a parallel?
no, because they are giving you an option. They are not saying that if you do not, all they are saying in those mails is that, let's say for example, again, I say that, okay, I will give my legal services in, let's say, 10 rupees. Okay. But then it's a way of getting attention from the other party where the other party is not listening. So I say that, okay, I can give you my legal services for 6 rupees, but there will only be this offer is valid only for next 10 days. So if you give an acceptance in next 10 days, I will give you services in 6 rupees. If not, if it goes beyond 10 days, I will go back to the original quote that I made. So you still have an option. Nobody is forcing. This is like a sale that I say that, okay, this thing is on sale. You take it or you leave it. You will always have an option to leave it. If you don't need it, you can leave it. Sometimes there's another situation in this is sometimes when you negotiate with someone, you say that, okay, this is the amount that you have quoted for this particular service is very high. Can you reduce it? So the other person says that, okay, for you, I will reduce it for, let's say, this thing. Otherwise, I go by that point. So in that situation also, then it can be forcing. Right? So just because someone is saying that this offer is valid only for this time period does not mean that they are forcing themselves upon you.
Okay. Weberji, can I ask one more question or do you want to move on?
No. Then you can wrap up your question. Then we'll move on.
Okay.
Because I think Isheta has a couple more slides.
I know. So sometimes, Ishita, what happens is that, you enter into a contract and most of these contracts, I mean, like now you're explaining the nitty-gritties, but we have been all making contracts based on our, knowledge of the subject. And very often you enter into a contract, but you also have what is called, like when you invoice someone, you send a bill for the services, right? And each bill that you have, it is always said that it's nice to have some terms and conditions of payment in the invoice also, right? Now, what happens in a situation where in a contract you have mentioned certain terms, but the invoice mentions certain terms which are contrary to what are in the contract. So, does the invoice which is sent at a subsequent date after the contract, do those terms override the terms of the contract, or do the original contract terms remain valid?
No. Most of the times when a situation like this comes up, they usually come back to you and say that this is not a valid invoice because the terms and conditions which are mentioned in the contract are these. So please raise another invoice with these terms and conditions.
Okay. All right. Good. I mean, I'm done. Thank you.
Great. So I will again jump back to my slides. Okay, where was I? This is where I was in. Oh, wait. Yes. Is my screen visible?
Yes.
Okay, great. Now let's move on to next slide, which is now non-binding written documents. Now, anything that you can get from this picture. We have been talking about agreements. We have been talking about something where we sign. We have been talking about document is very important. But surprisingly, and by law, there are certain documents which are not binding upon the parties. And when I say binding, I mean the parties can always go back to the promise that has been made in those contracts. Now, there are usually two situations in which such things happen. The first situation is any non-binding document can be of non-binding nature because it has failed. Sorry, cannot be of non-binding nature because it is either missing one of the key element of valid contract. And when I say key element, I'm talking about the elements that I just mentioned in the previous slide. So if one of these elements is not there in the valid contract that we are talking about, that contract will become invalid and at the same time non-binding. And second situation, it's a very interesting one actually, is that the contents of the contract or that document make it so that the law considers it to be not enforceable. Now, these are generally we call these documents as pre-contract documents. The documents that I'm going to just list out there, I'm sure all of us have heard about it. A letter of intent, an MOU. MOU is Memorandum of Understanding, a deal memo, or a term sheet. So interestingly enough, all of these documents are actually pre-contract documents. These documents we generally sign. We generally make these documents and sign because it kind of records and outlines the terms that the parties have agreed in principle. And then these documents also allow to see the parties how close they are to a particular deal, and it also provides a future framework for the negotiation. But these pre-contract documents they are actually not binding. You can always go back. Let's say if I give you a letter of intent saying I might take you as an actor in my next movie, that doesn't matter. Both the parties have signed it. That doesn't mean that the person is legally obligated to take you in the next film. Let's say in situations, let's say I'm making a particular film, and I think that currently, as per today's situation, I think that Ranjit sir suits to a particular role in the best possible way. Okay, and I give him a letter of intent saying that this is the role, and Ranjit sir will do this role in my movie. Now, let's say a month down the line, there are certain changes that have happened in the script, because of which, sadly, the role that I promised to Ranjit sir has been scrapped. So in that situation, I am not actually, because I did not sign a contract with him and I just gave him a letter of intent. So that usually means that I can go back on my promise. I have a reasonable reason to go back on this. See, most of these documents, whether it is a letter of intent, whether it is an MOU, deal memo, or a term sheet, these are 95% of the time they are converted into a proper contractual document where everything is listed out in detail and both the parties sign, and then those obligations, everything that you list out in that contract becomes binding. These normally parties go back on these documents only if there is a reasonable reason behind it. It is not like you sign an MOU and the other party will say that, okay, I don't feel like doing it. No, that will not happen. There has to be a solid reason most of the time when you go back on these documents. And these documents by nature are not binding before the court of law. But sometimes, again, now there is a small exception to this rule, is that, yes, doctor.
Yeah, this was a very interesting point, so I thought I'd stop you here. When you said that there has to be
I will just stop you over here because I actually want to explain the exception.
Please.
Explain the exception and then I'll take your question.
Please.
Now, this exception is that most of the time, like I said, that by nature, these documents are not accepted in the court of law. But then there are certain situations where these documents become binding. Now, these are situations when if there is a clause that specifically states that whatever is written in this document is legally binding upon both the parties. And if such a situation comes, or if this document comes in the court of law, so again, when the court of law is interpreting the contracts that belong to this particular industry, what I've seen is usually courts have relied on two things. One, they have seen they see that what is the written expression of the intent that is present in any of these documents. Is that intent binding or not? And second thing that they look at is the demonstrative actions that is taken by both the parties once that letter of intent is signed. So if after signing the letter of intent there is an implied contract, the court accepts, in those situations, the court accepts these documents as binding documents. So yes, this was the exception. Yes, sir. Now I'm ready to take the question.
Okay, so here my question was that you made a very interesting point that there has to be a let's say, a valid reason for somebody to, the court will look at, that is there a valid reason that you have because of which you are, if you try to take this to court and you say, well, I signed an MOU with these people and now they're backing out. And it the MOU by default you're saying is a non-binding document.
Yes, by nature,
Now
it's
assume
non-binding.
by nature, right? Now, if the MOU does not have that clause which says that these clauses will be binding in nature, right? They shall be deemed to be a contract, whichever way that wording is. But there is no, and you signed the MOU. Are you then saying that I have to have a very, very valid and provable reason before, before I can turn around and back out of it? Or can it be like, okay, I've got this role for you. I'll sign the MOU with you. Let's say I'm taking a voiceover artist for my film, right? For an animation film, I'm taking a voiceover artist and I say, okay, your voice would be best for this. I signed an MOU with him, right? But later on, let's say I have a physical, I have a scrap with him, I've had a fight with him and I don't like the guy anymore, right? Now, that's not a valid reason to, so is in that, and this is basically how relationships get spoiled, right?
Yes.
So
yes.
how does one safeguard?
Again, that is why have the main and the solid answer to this is have a contract. You can always have a smaller 2-pager contract. It is very easy to make it have a contract. But let's say the harsh reality in situations like these is one, what is reasonable and what is valid is not defined anywhere. It actually depends. No, it's not defined. It's subjective. Something that is reasonable for me might not be reasonable for you. It's like this thing is true. For me, these things is true, or something that I like or I don't like. So again, what is valid and what is reasonable is very subjective. Especially in our industry, in the media, it is very subjective, and a lot of things go ahead on trust and how well two people get along with each other.
So here's, let me just stop you. Let me just stop you there. Let me just stop you there. Where you brought this point of trust, and which we call good faith, right? We're doing this on good faith, and it's all right. We'll get to signing the contract. The point is, most of these problems arise in that interim period where you've done the MOU and you are now preparing to go into the stage of putting the contract in place. And in the middle of that, let's say this kind of an unfortunate incident happens where you say, I don't want to work with this guy, ever again. I don't want to see his face. Let's assume, right? Now, can this person then make this an enforceable or a binding contract because you don't have a valid reason? Or is your reason valid enough that I can't work with it?
If this person, anybody can go to the court. First of all, nobody can stop anybody from going to the court. So that is not what you do. But once this document will be in front of the court, by nature, they will say that this is a non-binding document. Okay. But still, if the person wants to continue the relationship, sometimes the court get into a stage where they see that, okay, there is something valid, there is a valid claim that is before us. They will move ahead, and especially with this industry that I'm talking about, they usually get into a situation where they try and interpret this particular, and they see the intent behind it. Is there an implied? Because sometimes, most of the times, once after an MOU is signed, or after a deal memo is signed, or after a letter of intent is given, a lot of times there are situations where the parties form the implied contract that we just discussed few minutes back. So if there is an implied contract and that can be proved in court, then this document also becomes binding.
All right.
So, but then doing that becomes, honestly, on a reality point of view, it gets very difficult. And then the focus shifts, and there are several other factors which come into play in situations like this, which kind of disrupts the main focus of the artist and of the creative people.
Yeah, so
So
see, the
yeah,
reality, the harsh reality is also that people in this, at least in our kind of specifically in our industry, are more in a rush to get onto the project than they are in safeguarding their interests through a piece of paper. And
yes,
typically, I think you are also right in the opening slide. The minute you say, why don't we put things down on paper, it's viewed like what, you don't trust me or what, you know?
yes.
Now, the reason I
The
brought this point up is that between the MOU and the contract, there will be some time that will pass. There
yes,
will be a gap. It's not that, and people prefer not to wait to get on the project because they're saying, look, we signed the MOU, what can go wrong?
hmm,
Now, in this case, it's normally the underdog that gets the short end of the stick.
right.
So what's the safeguard? You can't
So
enforce a contract
the
because some time
safeguard is,
has to be given, right?
see, I'm not saying that you can't still enforce this document. That's why I said that by nature it is non-binding. But sometimes in the industry like ours and several other creative industries where a lot of relationships are built on trust, courts get into a position where they want to interpret what has happened after signing the MOU. They get into that conversation, right? So it is not that it cannot be legally enforceable. Yes, it can still be enforced on the party if the balls can be turned in your favor. Having said that, the most important thing that we have to do over here, and why are we talking about contracts, is primarily to change this particular attitude. See, a contract does not mean that even if you are in a rush, you can, if you have a time to make a two-pager MOU or a two-pager intent, you can always have two-pager contract also, or a three-pager. If there is too much of hurry, if, let's say, sometimes a lot of people don't get into a contract also because they have a fear of wrongly interpreting something, or that ki agar I don't have the knowledge to actually interpret or comprehend what is written in this contract, so I might not get into it. I will write a simple email and I will move ahead with it. That is a wrong attitude. That has to change, because once that changes, a lot of things can be ironed out at a much prior situation. Because to be honest, litigations and court cases are not in very good taste. They should be the last resort that should be picked up by anybody. Going to the court is not easy because it needs a lot of time, a lot of effort, and a lot of patience. So to change that and to not be in a situation where I don't know what to do or I have to prove my claim, it's better to have a piece of paper. You can spend that 1 day or 2 day into creating that document, which is going to save you for the rest of your life. So that's the answer. Okay. I hope I can move forward now, sir. Okay. Now, I am going to throw lights and I'm just going to, what should I say, upar se explain some popular contracts that are that we often listen to in this particular industry. See, there are many contracts. When we talk about media and entertainment industries, there are approximately hundreds, 150s types of contracts. So it is not possible to get into each one of that and discuss each one of that. So what I've done is I've tried and uh, picked up the contracts which are most talked about, and I'm just going to explain that. And do not worry, I will get into the nitty-gritties of it also in the upcoming slides. So the first agreement that I want to talk about is an intellectual property agreement. Now, intellectual property, when I say intellectual property agreement, it is just basically, it can be a clause, it can be a different agreement, like a merchandising agreement where you want to, let's say I want to make a movie on a book, or I want to make a web series on a book which is already, which is an intellectual property of somebody else. In this situation, the first contract that you will have to execute is a IP agreement. It could be a licensing agreement, could be a merchandising agreement, could be any agreement that helps you acquire those rights and rights to actually make a particular in the example that I give, acquire the rights of the book to be made into a film. Because if you make any project based on somebody else's copyright without taking their consent, you are doing copyright infringement, my friend. So this is one important contract that you should know about. Second contract that is there is again contract for rights. Now this contract could be for several other rights. Why I have differentiated into intellectual property rights agreements, because these agreements focus on the intellectual property of somebody else. Now, apart from the intellectual property rights, there are several other rights that we talk about and that we listen. Rights like the most popular rights that we have been, and the most new rights that we have been listening to these days is the things like OTT rights or distribution rights or broadcasting rights. So, if you get into any agreement or any contract uh, where the focus is these rights, those contracts can be contract for rights. The next set of contracts that we often listen to and we also use is service agreement. Now, these service agreement is whenever you perform something for someone in this industry, you get into the contract. These service agreement could be things like actor agreement, could be things like a writer agreement, a director agreement, or um, making teaser music agreement, or like Sir said, that giving a voiceover in an animation. So these are different categories of services that people give to each other in the industry. So in that situation, you go into a service agreement. Now another agreement which is very interesting and I won't say very common as of now in India, but still it is there, is a is a options agreement. Now option agreement is basically where you have an option to kind of okay, now let me give you an example that I really don't know how to define this particular thing, because it's more of an agreement that is done in practice. So it is actually very popular in the music industry, where they kind of incorporate an option and exit clause in their agreement, wherein they say that they will exit the deal if their music is not released or is not made public or is not commercially utilized, despite the fact that I have a particular term with you and I have my exclusive rights with you. If the other party do not performs the promises that they have done, we will move out of the agreement. So options agreement primarily are those set of agreements where the other party kind of puts on a condition or keeps their options open. Now over here, when we are talking about options agreement, one thing that we need to understand is that whatever that option is that we are keeping for ourselves should be very clearly and specifically mentioned right there in the contract. If you try to write it down in between the lines, or if you write it very vaguely, then it might be a problem for you. You will not be able to exercise that particular option that you actually wanted to exercise. Okay, the next set of agreement, which is very popular, I will say that this is the most commonly heard about contracts, is confidentiality agreements. Things like NDA. You walk into a production house to do something, the first thing that you are handed over is an NDA. If you want to protect, it is also used by a lot of writers. This agreement is very popular with the writers also, wherein they try to protect their story by making the person to whom they are disclosing sign an NDA with them, so that the story doesn't become public. So these confidentiality agreement, if I talk about, this is basically to protect the information that is being disclosed between the parties. Now, like I said, another important factor that on which this industry works is the mystery around the projects that we create. So most of the time, you will always have a very big contractual clause in your agreement, which I will discuss in the upcoming slides, or you will get an NDA in hand. The main focus, there are 2-3 things that NDA would scream is: one, they will define what a confidential information is. Now that confidential information will be anything and everything that they tell you. It can be a simple conversation, which has, let's say, you walk into a particular, I'm just giving an example, that you walk into a production house and you offer your services to them. Okay. They say that, okay, while that discussion, they are again disclosing something that has absolute no correlation with your services, but they're just discussing with you. It could be a simple discussion on their upcoming projects or the ideas that they're working on or the concepts that they are working for. Even that is protected under the confidentiality agreement. It could be the financial information of a particular party, anything anything that relates to the project. It could be their technical know-how, their invention, their copyright details, their client details, employee details. So every information that one particular party has, which they are going to disclose you uh, at that point in time, or over the period of certain months that you're going to be that you're going to have a relationship with them, all of that information will be protected by confidential information. Second important thing that the confidential agreements has is that they specifically say that these agreements are not for information which is already out there in the public domain. Or if you want to disclose any particular information relating to a party, you can do that after obtaining their consent. Then other things that these agreements talks about is that what are the situations where a breach, which will be considered as a breach of confidential information, and the situations which will not be considered as a breach. So I will just talk about it in the upcoming slides. The fifth and another very popular agreement is a freelancer agreement. Now, freelancers industry typically deals with, there are a lot of, that is a set of, it's like a community in itself which is existing in the industry, videographers, writers, musicians, or several artists who just do simple freelancing work. And they're usually hired for a very specific thing, and you tell them, so there are, so these agreements are also important, wherein you say that, okay, we are hiring you for this, we will pay you for this particular job, we are going to pay you this amount, whatever you are doing for us, the rights of that belongs to us. So those are the typical freelancer agreements that we have. Another agreements that are, I would not say very popular in the industry, but still it is still an important aspect of the industry, are the technology agreements. Now these technology, now the industry is going on a lot of, involves a lot of technology. Now, like in the animation world, there are several softwares that are involved. Sometimes you try and bringing that technology from some other country. So agreements related to that, collaborations on technology, things like when you have to do certain things on your app, on your YouTube channels, a lot of those agreements fall under the technology agreement category. Another very important agreement that is very that is primarily the core of the industry are the distribution agreements. So whenever you make a thing, the next step, you make a project, be it a film, be it a web series, be it an advertisement, anything, you have to do something about it, right? You're going to distribute it, especially when it comes to films or web series. You have to distribute it, you have to send it out to somewhere. So when you make agreements to distribute your particular project, that is when distribution agreements come in handy. Now these agreements primarily talk about things like the project that is being distributed, the manner in which it will be distributed, the rights that you are giving to the other party who's going to distribute it for you, or who's going to be your distributor for that particular thing. All of those things are covered under the distribution agreement. The last, and again one of the core agreements that is important, is a production agreement. Now this production agreement is usually a set of documents that that is prepared before you actually start working on your project. Now let's say you have to shoot a uh, particular project. So for that, you will get into actor agreement, writer agreement, director agreement. If two production houses are collaborating, then there collaboration agreements. Then if then all sorts of location agreements, licenses, all of those fall in the production agreement category. Okay, now since we have talked about the type of agreements, the meaning of the agreements, now it is time to let the genie out of the bottle and talk about the most important and the most complicated thing, and also the reason because of which a lot of people don't actually get into the contract is the clauses in that contract. So I have just picked up this kind of cartoon from the net that says we have updated our terms and conditions. Just look at the expression of the other person. So this is how most of the time, especially I'm not generalizing it, but yes, that's a general thing. A lot of times, artists and people who are just starting in the industry, they are very scared of contract because they think कि अरे हम अगर contract पे कुछ भी बोलेंगे तो हमारा चांस चला जाएगा. इतनी मुश्किल से चांस मिला है because this is again an highly competitive industry. तो अगर हम ज्यादा बोलेंगे तो ऐसा ना हो हमारा चांस चला जाए. But at the same time, it is very important to understand before you sign any piece of document, um, and the fact that this document is going to be binding upon you for the rest of your life or for the term of that particular contract. It is important that you understand what is written in them. So, like I said, that it is not possible to actually discuss the types of contracts and then the provisions that come in those contracts. What I've done is I've picked the most common and the clauses that are 99% of the time you will find these contracts, or I would say rather 100% of the time, these are the clauses that you will find in the contract in one form or the other. So I am now going to explain those to you. Okay, the first clause that is very important and that you should always check is the scope of work. So it could be, now whenever you get a contract, you'll see that there are several headings that you have. Sometimes there are headings, sometimes there are clauses, sometimes there are it's just written like a story, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Sometimes it is heading, explanation, and then. So those headings are actually simple interpretative terms and just to make it simpler. But when you read a contract, these are the things that you have to look forward to. So the first thing that you have to look forward to is the scope of work. So when you, sometimes what happens is that you have discussed something and the contract. Is someone trying to say something?
No, I think someone was not on mute.
Okay.
I muted them. Sorry for
that. Thank you. That's okay. Yeah. So coming back to the scope of work, the industry is volatile, very volatile, and the relationship changes with a lot of things, right? So it is very important that when you read a contract, you clearly see कि भाई आपका क्या रोल है. अगर आपको सर्विसेज देनी है या अगर आपको कुछ काम करना है, मेक श्योर आप बहुत क्लियरली पढ़ रहे हो कि आपके कॉन्ट्रैक्ट में उतना ही काम दिया है जितना आपने डिस्कस किया. कई बार ऐसा होता है कि वी इंक्रीज द स्कोप ऑफ वर्क और हम ऐसा सोचते हैं दैट अरे हमारा इनके साथ रिलेशनशिप बहुत अच्छा है तो हमें बाद में जाके स्कोप ऑफ वर्क बढ़ाना पड़ेगा, इससे अच्छा सब कुछ अभी डाल दो. और ये अक्सर होता है, ये मैंने अक्सर देखा है. कई बार जब कॉन्ट्रैक्ट रिव्यू के लिए आते हैं तो जो एक्चुअल डिस्कशन टाइम पे या नेगोशिएशन टाइम पे डिसाइड किया होता है कि ये 1, 2, 3 पॉइंट्स होंगे. जब कॉन्ट्रैक्ट आता है तो पता चलता है वो 3 पॉइंट का 13 पॉइंट बन चुका है. वो 10 पॉइंट्स क्या है समझ ही नहीं आ रहा. एंड व्हेन यू गो बैक टू द पर्सन, दे विल से कि यार देखो हमने इतना स्कोप करना है, तो स्कोप के बाद ऐसा हो सकता है कि वो एक्सटेंड हो जाए, हम आपसे ये भी करा लें, ये भी करा लें, ये भी करा लें, तो सब अभी लिख लेते. नो, डोंट लेट दैट हैपन. Make sure that the scope of work is very clear. Nothing is missed out and nothing extra is added. Just make sure you very clearly define. Let's say if Ranjit sir hires me to animate his next project. I mean, obviously that will not happen, but let's say if he hires me to, so my contract should describe and define only these points. that this person is going to animate the next show that Ranveer sir is going to produce, or let's say the first 13 episodes of the show. So this is how you word it. Very clearly and very specifically define your scope of work. Do not keep it open. Do not write it in vague terms. और अगर आपको expand करना ही है, what you can do is, a lot of times we include an extra thing wherein we say that any activity which needs to be done in relation to the main service that the person is offering, that will also come under the ambit of scope of work. That is how you expand. Over here also हमने बहुत specifically define कर लिया है कि भाई ये काम है जो मुझे सामने वाले के लिए करना है, और इस काम से जुड़ी हुई जितनी एक्टिविटीज मुझे करनी पड़ेंगी वो सारी चीजें स्कोप ऑफ वर्क का पार्ट बनेगी. दिस इज हाउ यू जनरली इंटरप्रेट एंड दिस इज हाउ एन आइडियल स्कोप ऑफ वर्क clause should be. Now the second clause, that is the consideration and payment terms. Now always there are certain, when you are reading this clause, now this could be termed as, this could be headed as the payment clause or the consideration clause or remuneration clause or a fee clause. It can be headed anything. So but any clause that talks about the consideration that is going to happen, there are few questions that always ask yourself. If you get an answer to those questions in clear terms, you are good to go. These questions are: what is being paid? What are the expenses, extra expenses that is included in that amount? And will I be paid anything apart from that? Like for example, I perform a particular task for which I am paid, let's say 1 lakh rupees. Okay. Now to perform that task, there are certain several other expenses that will incur or that will come. Let's say I will have to travel to perform that work, or that work might need my physical presence, or I need to promote the work certain places. So all of these expenses will either be covered in the fees that the person is giving me, or they will say that these expenses will be paid extra. So in both the situations, make sure that you have an answer to this thing and you're clear on this thing. The next thing that you need to check is what are the payment timelines. And if there are any payment timelines, then do I need to raise an invoice? Is there a need to raise an invoice? So those payment timelines, is it, now when I say payment timelines, I mean basically पैसा कब मिलेगा? Let's say जब हम एक employment उसमें होते हैं, so it could be कि usually next month के पहले 7 दिनों में मिलेगा. Okay, you are okay with it, it is clear. But there should be a defined, set, specifically defined timeline जब पैसा मिलेगा. और next thing जो आपको देखना है is that, is there a need to raise an invoice? If I have to raise an invoice, what are the terms and conditions for those invoices? Another thing that you need to check is what are the tax implications on the money? Do I need to pay the tax? Will the company cut the TDS? Is there an extra GST invoice that I have to raise? So those things should be there. And next thing, another very important thing is the terms of the, if I have to raise an invoice or if there are payment terms. Now when I say payment terms, I mean a lot of times you see कि वहाँ पे लिखा होता है that the person will be paid this consideration if the service is done as per the satisfaction of the other party. In the contract, make sure somewhere this satisfaction is defined. क्योंकि अगर आप, let's say you perform a task, you do a service for somebody. Let's say you say that I will give the music for your show. Okay. Now let's say the contract says कि हम उस music को जब तक चाहें, because ऐसे contracts होते हैं which says that हम उस music में जितने changes चाहें, जितनी बार उस काम को rework कराना चाहें, हम करा सकते हैं. Now in that situation, satisfaction तब तक fulfill नहीं होगी जब तक सामने वाला खुश नहीं है काम से. और ऐसा भी हो सकता है that they say that because we were not satisfied with your work, we are going to cut this particular amount from your payment timeline. Don't let that happen. Or even if you want this thing, then make sure you define it in the contract and you know this thing. It is written out there. या अगर आप ये चाहते हो कि नहीं हम इनमें जो भी हम काम जो हम रीवर्क करेंगे, जो हम चेंजेस लाएंगे आफ्टर सेंडिंग द फर्स्ट ड्राफ्ट, हम वो 4 टाइम्स से ज्यादा नहीं करेंगे। तो 4 बारी में आपको जितने चेंजेस कराने हैं आप करा लो, उससे ज्यादा अगर आप जाओगे देन दैट विल बी बियॉन्ड द स्कोप ऑफ वर्क। सो व्हाटएवर दोस टर्म्स आर, मेक श्योर दैट यू नो दोस टर्म्स, ओके। And another important thing that you need to check in the consideration clause is regarding the royalties. अगर किसी को भी रॉयल्टी पे होनी है, सो ट्राई एंड गेट दोज थिंग्स क्लियरली डिफाइंड इन द कॉन्ट्रैक्ट कि भाई रॉयल्टी कितनी पे होगी, किस तरीके से पे होगी। बिकॉज कई बार ऐसा होता है कि डायरेक्टली कंपनी डायरेक्टली आपको बोलती है दैट वी विल गिव द रॉयल्टी डायरेक्टली टू द पर्सन। Sometimes that royalty is paid to the copyright society and then the copyright society further divides it. Sometimes that royalty is paid to the association and then association will pay to the concerned person. So you need to know that what are these terms with regards to royalty, and everything has to be, I'm again repeating, whatever you write in the contract should be in a clearly defined in a very specific manner. अगर नहीं समझ आ रहा है या कुछ मिसिंग चल लग रहा है, ट्रस्ट मी देयर इज नो हार्म इन गोइंग बैक। एंड ऐसा नहीं होगा कि आपको एक कॉन्ट्रैक्ट पकड़ाया गया है, अगर आप कॉन्ट्रैक्ट पे क्वेश्चन करोगे तो ऐसा नहीं होगा कि प्रोडक्शन हाउस बोलेगा कि अरे तुमने क्वेश्चन कैसे कर लिया, आई एम टेकिंग दिस। So you're not going to lose out on the opportunity just because you're asking questions on contract. So make sure you do that. The next clause, which is important and which should be clearly defined and understood in the contract, is related to the intellectual property rights. So make sure कि जब आप intellectual property rights clause पढ़ रहे हो तो पहली चीज आपको समझ में आना चाहिए, आपको ये चीज पता होना चाहिए कि okay, in my last episode I discussed a lot about the rights that copyrights give you, the economic rights, the moral rights, the fact that there sometimes there can be situations where an author of the work is someone else and the owner of the work is someone else, and the fact that moral rights cannot, the owner of the work, the author of the work will always have moral rights no matter what happens. So make sure you understand that clause, listen to that, and then in that light read the agreement. If you're going to transfer your rights, you should know that you're going to transfer your commercial rights for a certain consideration that you're getting. If there is an employer-employee relationship, make sure, and you need to understand if it is an employer-employee relationship or if it is a work made for hire. You need to know and you need to understand that that particular work that you're doing, the rights will belong to the person for whom you are doing the work, or the employer will have the rights. So all of these things you should understand, and when you read the intellectual property rights clauses, because a lot of times there are certain things in the clause जो समझ नहीं आता. Again, there is no harm in going back and asking the meaning of it. So make sure you read the IP rights. Also, IP rights में you need to see कि आप rights कितने time पे, अगर if it is a, let's say, a licensing agreement, so you're going to transfer your right for a certain period of time. Make sure you know what that time period is. Are you transferring your right for 3 years, for 5 years? What is that time period? Okay. If it is for perpetuity, then you need to know that also, that okay, it is for perpetuity. The third thing that you need to check is ये वाले जो rights आप transfer कर रहे हो, ये for how many jurisdictions are you doing it? Are you doing it only for India? Are you giving away the rights? Are you giving away the worldwide rights? Are you giving only for let's say 2-3 territories? So whatever territories you are giving your rights, or those rights are taken, that has also been defined, and check that in the intellectual property clause. Okay. Now moving on. Okay, why is it not moving? Yes. The next thing that you need to check in your agreement. Okay, now this clause is not very common. Sometimes you will see this thing, sometimes you will not see this thing. Now, when I say exclusivity, okay, things like I am exclusively, okay, sometimes this usually happens in advertisement agreements, or sometimes it also happens that an actor signs an agreement with exclusively with a production house for a certain period of time. So when I say exclusive, if there is an exclusive relationship, make sure that that relationship is clearly written and defined in the contract. If I try to define the exclusivity in legal terms, it is generally a situation where the person is prohibiting from using and prohibiting you from going to any competing agency or to anybody else to perform the job that you are performing for this particular agency. So if you're getting into an exclusive relationship with someone, make sure that that exclusivity is defined in the agreement, number one. Number two, make sure कि ये exclusivity का time period defined है. Because sometimes ऐसा होता है that you get into a relationship, you get into a contract with someone for, let's say, 7 years. And out of those 7 years, for the first 3 years, you are exclusive to them, and the remaining 5 years, for the remaining 4 years, you are non-exclusive. So in that situation, also make sure that the term of exclusivity is clearly defined in the agreement. Okay, the next clause that we have talked about, जिसके बारे में I've talked in the previous slide also, is the confidentiality clause. So this confidentiality clause you will find in all the agreements that you sign. Now this usually is there because what happens is whenever you get into this is a kind of preventive measure also that the companies take, and we also advise a lot of companies to take, because whenever you get into a professional relationship with someone, sometimes it could be at a stage where you're just having a conversation with them, and you might get into a relationship, you might not get into a relationship, but during that process, both the parties disclose a lot of significant information to each other. Which information, if it goes out, it might destroy a lot of things for you. Now, let's say you want to collaborate with someone on a particular project. Let's say you want to put in money in somebody's project. You go to that person and you discuss the project with them, and you say that, okay, I will put in this much amount of money in your project. Now, tomorrow something happens and you're not able to give that money to them, and you say that, okay, maybe I have found a better way to invest my money, so I'm not going to invest in your project, and we are not getting into any kind of commercial relationship. Now, in that situation, because they wanted you to invest in that, they disclosed a lot of things about their projects in front of you, which is not there in public domain. And if that goes out, that project is gone for a toss. And it usually in these situations, the project either gets shelved or it is never made. So to protect any such situation, usually you have a confidentiality clause in the agreement, wherein the other party, both the parties, it is not just, okay, one thing that you have to be very sure in the confidentiality clause is that, see that clause should be from both the parties. Because if somebody is giving you certain information, you are also giving your information to them. Now that information could be your personal information, things like your name, things like your contact number, things like the clients that you have previously worked with, the kind of work that you have actually done. You might end up discussing your concepts and your ideas also with the person. So make sure that this clause has a binding effect from both the parties. The clause should say that the parties agree to this thing. The confidential information of the parties, or if the information or whatever implications for disclosing the information is there, it should be for both the parties. So that's how ideally a confidentiality clause should be drafted. One thing that you will again find in the confidentiality clause are situations. Make sure that your confidentiality clause clearly defines that what will be breach of confidentiality clause and what will be the breach, what will not be a confidentiality clause. Because let's say you have actually discussed something about the project which was already there in the public domain. In that situation, can the person invoke confidentiality clause on you? So the answer is no. So the information which is already there in the public domain, or the information that you have gotten to know from somebody else and not from this person. So situations like these will not be a breach. Or let's say if you have to disclose any information to a because of the order of the court or to any judicial authority or to police, usually such disclosure is not a breach of confidentiality. So make sure your clause also defines what will not be a breach. Okay. The next thing that you have to keep in mind and you have to check in your contract is, are the termination triggers. Now, normally what happens, every contract will have a term. You will always find something called as a term and termination. So term of contract is basically the life of that contract. Let's say I am getting into a relationship, into a contractual relationship with you for 2 years. My contract says that this contract will be valid for 2 years. After 2 years, the contract will automatically end. So there is no question about termination. Termination is basically when you want to end your contract before the term that is defined in the contract. So you need to check what are the situations where termination can happen. Make sure you list out those situations. Now, normally, in normal contracts, these termination situations are could be things like where one party breaches it, or things like if one of the parties become insolvent, or things like if there is if a criminal record comes in front of any of the parties, or it could be for any other reason. Okay, so make sure that, so whatever reason for which the termination can happen, make sure you know these reasons. And if there is something like for any reason whatsoever, make sure you get a notice period. So if you want to, it should, so you should not land up. Why I'm saying that termination triggers are important is that there is a contractual relationship, everything is going fine. Now let's go back to an example that Ranjit sir says, that let's say today two people who are in a contractual relationship, they fight with each other. Now in that situation, it should not happen. You should not land up in a situation where the other person is saying that, okay, I don't want to work with you from tomorrow, so I'm not going to work with you, so I'm terminating the agreement. That should not happen. So to cope up with that, usually there is a notice period that is attached to all the termination triggers that we are talking about. Even in the case of breach, usually you give the other party, you inform you, the clause is drafted in a manner where it says that if a breach has happened, the breach will be communicated to the other party, and the other party will get this particular time to actually resolve this thing, to actually work on the breach. And if the breach still exists after the time period that is given to you, then the contract will be terminated. So make sure that you know what these trigger points are, and in any manner, when you interpret these things, it should not, you should, in any manner, you should not feel that अच्छा ऐसा हो सकता है कि कल को कोई भी उठ के बोले कि भाई हमें तो नहीं करना जी, हमारा मन नहीं है. ऐसी सिचुएशन नहीं होनी चाहिए. इसलिए it's important to read the termination triggers which are mentioned in your contract. Now there are, I think, 4-5 more important clauses left. So another thing that you need to know is breach or default. Try and see, and preferably, and it is always advisable to define the breach in the contract. Make sure that your contract somehow tells you, it should be clear कि अगर हम ये चीज नहीं करेंगे, then it will be a breach of contract. Things like if I'm told to perform a particular task, if I'm not performing that task, then it will be a breach. So you should know what a breach means and what will happen if a breach happens or if a default happens. Can I terminate the agreements if a breach happens? Will I get time to actually work on that breach and make sure to correct it? So situations like these should be defined in your agreement. Now this breach could be as simple as if my work delivery is poor. Let's say I have to write a story for Ranjit, and he says that you have to write, the timeline for you to write this story is 10 days. And if you do not send this first draft of the story to me in 10 days, a material breach is happening. and then I might terminate this contract. So in this situation, I know that I have a time frame and I have certain quality standards that are defined in the contract. If I don't fulfill those quality standards, or if I don't fulfill the timeline, then the breach would happen. And the result of that breach will be immediate termination of the contract. So make sure you have certain these things. If these are not there, you can always go back to the drafter and you can ask them कि please breach define कर किस सिचुएशन में ब्रीच होगा, कब ब्रीच नहीं होगा, और अगर ब्रीच होगा या मेरे पार्ट पे डिफॉल्ट होगा तो क्या कॉन्ट्रैक्ट इमीडिएटली टर्मिनेट हो जाएगा या मेरे को मौका दिया जाएगा उस चीज को सॉल्व करने का, और अगर मौका दिया जाएगा तो मौका कितना बड़ा होगा, उसका टाइम पीरियड भी क्या होगा, 7 दिन, 10 दिन, 12 दिन, 45 दिन, whatever it is. Okay, now another very popular clause जो एक्चुअली आजकल बड़ा पॉपुलर हो गया स्पेशली कोविड के बाद इज फोर्स मेजोर. अगर मैं फोर्स मेजोर को सिंपल वर्ड्स में बोलूं, इट इज एक्ट ऑफ गॉड. सो यूजुअली क्या होता है ना, हर एक्ट ऑफ गॉड और सिचुएशंस व्हिच इज बियॉन्ड ह्यूमन कंट्रोल. नाउ इट कैन इंक्लूड पैंडेमिक सिचुएशंस, इट कैन इंक्लूड earthquake situations, it can include a natural catastrophe. So anything जो, और अगर फोर्स मेजोर का लिटरल ट्रांसलेशन पे हम जाएं तो फोर्स मेजोर का मतलब होता है ग्रेटर फोर्स. So anything that occurs beyond your control. So usually इस इंडस्ट्री के कॉन्ट्रैक्ट्स में अब फोर्स मेजोर क्लॉजेस बहुत पॉपुलर हो गए हैं, और यूजुअली हम ये बोलते हैं कि अगर कोई भी फोर्स मेजोर इवेंट होता है और वो इवेंट एक सर्टेन टाइम पीरियड के लिए रहता है, उसके बाद हमारे पास ऑप्शन होगा चाहे इस अग्रीमेंट को एक्सटेंड करने का या टर्मिनेट करने का या रीनेगोशिएट करने का, क्योंकि अब एक सिचुएशन आ गई है जहां पे पार्टीज अपना एक्ट परफॉर्म नहीं कर सकती हैं एक ऐसी सिचुएशन की वजह से जिसपे उनका कोई कंट्रोल नहीं. फॉर एग्जाम्पल, लॉकडाउन में व्हाट हैपेंड वाज देयर वर अ लॉट ऑफ प्रोजेक्ट्स दैट वर पुट ऑन होल्ड बिकॉज दे वर नॉट अलाउड टू शूट. क्योंकि लॉकडाउन था, यू वर नॉट अलाउड टू कम आउट इन पब्लिक. लॉकडाउन ओपन होने के बाद भी ऐसे कई प्रोजेक्ट्स थे जो शूट नहीं हो पाए बिकॉज ऑफ द स्ट्रिक्ट नॉर्म्स दैट वर देयर. थिंग्स लाइक जब आप पब्लिक प्लेस में हो, यू हैव टू पुट ऑन अ मास्क. नाउ इन दिस सिचुएशन यू हैव टू डू इट. इट इज something has happened, and to something like COVID has happened, and to work on it and to make sure that आपको कोविड ना हो या किसी और को कोविड ना हो, यू हैव, गवर्नमेंट ने कुछ रेगुलेशंस निकाले हैं. दीज आर थिंग्स बियॉन्ड योर कंट्रोल. सो इस सिचुएशन में जो प्रोजेक्ट 2 साल में बनना था वो नहीं बन पाया, और जो प्रोजेक्ट का टर्म था, जो कॉन्ट्रैक्ट का टर्म था 3 साल का, वो शायद आपको 5 साल का करना पड़ेगा. या ऐसा भी हो सकता है कि वो प्रोजेक्ट बने ही ना, बिकॉज बहुत सारा टाइम का लॉस हो चुका है, मनी का लॉस हो चुका है, और नाउ इट इज नॉट द राइट टाइम टू शूट द प्रोजेक्ट एंड टू रिलीज इट. So in situations like these, usually force majeure clauses come in handy, जहाँ पे आप clearly, अच्छा force majeure में ना एक चीज that you have to always check is that make sure that a force majeure event is clearly defined. Things like pandemic, lockdown, act of God, things like these are included, and make sure that the clause somewhere mentions 3 words: beyond ह्यूमन कंट्रोल. सो ऐसा नहीं है कि फोर्स मेजोर इवेंट ऐसा नहीं होना चाहिए कि भाई हम उसको कंट्रोल कर सकते थे. हमारे पास अगर कोई भी तरीका है या कोई भी चांस है अपने एक्ट को करने का या परफॉर्म, या अपने कॉन्ट्रैक्ट के अंदर अपने ऑब्लिगेशंस को परफॉर्म करने का, देन फोर्स मेजर क्लॉज ट्रिगर नहीं हो सकता. सो मेक श्योर इसको आप वाटरटाइट करके चल. The next thing that you need to see, या अक्सर ये बहुत कॉमन नहीं है, मैंने कई सारे कॉन्ट्रैक्ट्स में ये क्लॉज होता है, कई सारे कॉन्ट्रैक्ट्स में नहीं होता है, बट स्टिल आई विल ट्राई एंड डिफाइन दीज damages contract. Damages is basically not compensation, it is basically something, a monetary consideration that you give to somebody because you have been put in a bad situation because of something that they have done. So it is usually a standard practice to include the damages clause or a liquidated damages clause. Liquidated damages clause में क्या होता है? You put in a predetermined clause. You say that कि भाई let's say I have to deliver something to you. if I don't deliver it, then I will pay damages up to, then you will have to pay damages up to, let's say, 50 lakh to me if you don't perform this particular act. So damages is generally capping now again, damages में एक चीज that you have to keep in mind that जो कोर्ट damages देगा, different type of damages, वो उनके interpretation के हिसाब से और laws के हिसाब से और nature and impact of the breach के हिसाब से different damage हो सकता है. ठीक है. Another very interesting clause that is always, that you will always find in most of the contract, and especially media industry में तो ये clause I think 99.9% agreements में होता है, is an indemnity clause. Now, one thing that you need to understand and is important for you guys to know is that indemnity is different from damages, because indemnity is an additional and a parallel remedy to damage. It is basically something that you are asking for additionally, number one. Number two, when you talk about indemnity, if there is an indemnity, you do not need to prove the damages, to prove the breach or to prove कि ये चीज हुई है. Okay, it is, if I try and define indemnity in simplest possible words, it is basically an unconditional promise to do good for anything. Now, this good can be losses, this good can be third-party claims, this could be any liability that is inflicting upon a person. So make sure कि जब आप indemnity clause कर रहे हो, so first that indemnity should be capped. उसको कभी भी खाली मत छोड़ना, कभी भी उसको unlimited. If there is an unlimited indemnity, then it might be a problem for the party who has to pay that indemnity. So try and always cap it, and usually ऐसे देखा है कि जो indemnity cap होता है, that's usually 2 times of the contract's amount. Yeah, 2 times of whatever will be paid till the time you invoke that particular clause. So always cap the indemnity, number one. Number two, make sure that you are not correlating the indemnity with breach or obligations of the parties. क्योंकि again obligation हो जाएगा तो वो बहुत unlimited हो जाता है, and then it can be invoked in any particular situation. So make sure that you always read this clause. The indemnity situations are defined. Basically आपको indemnity देनी कब है? आपको losses के situation में देनी है, आपको third party claims पे देनी है, या liability पे ना. Again, अगर आप सिर्फ liability कर दोगे तो फिर हर liability जो उनके ऊपर आएगी, they might ask you to indemnify. So a safer option is that you say that we will indemnify you for the liability that is inflicted upon you because of any act that we have done. So those are the ideal situations, and those are the ideal indemnity clauses. Now another very interesting clause जो usually हम miscellaneous clauses या boilerplate clauses में डाल देते हैं is the choice of law. अब क्या होता है? See, we are going now. This choice of law becomes more important if there is an international party involved in the particular situation for which the contracts are made, or if there are parties, even if there are domestic parties, then let's say 2 parties are from different states. So in that situations, it is always advisable and it is always told that choice of law, और आप अगर dispute में choice of law कौन सा jurisdiction होगा, और अगर आप dispute में जाते हो, so उस dispute को basically how are you going to resolve it? Make sure this thing you read and you know, because most of the time choice of law जो contract बनवा रहा होता है वो अपना choice of law अगर international party है, see अगर India है तो कोई problem नहीं है, because then you will say that Indian laws will be applicable. But अगर दो international या बहुत सारे international parties involved हैं, so make sure that you come into a mutual agreement when you talk about choice of law. Don't leave it बात के लिए. Make sure you discuss it, and as per your discussion and as per the mutual agreement, Indian laws होंगे, कोई international laws apply होंगे, या 2-3 countries के होंगे, या किसी और country के होंगे, whatever it is, discuss it and accordingly put it in your contract. Third thing कि अगर usually क्या होता है जब disputes arise होते हैं, it is always safe एंड कन्वीनियंट टू राइट कि अगर डिस्प्यूट होगा हम पहले उसको आपस में सुलझाने की कोशिश करेंगे, नहीं सुलझा तो हम आर्बिट्रेशन में लेके जाएंगे एंड देन वील गो टू डिस्प्यूट. That has to be the basic, if I may say, the life cycle of resolving the dispute, and it is more advisable to have a clause like this. So this is these are the important contractual clauses that uh, that are mostly there in the contract. I hope abhi thoda sa clear hoga when you will read these things or when you see these things. Before taking questions, there are just 2 more slides left, which are just simple tips and tricks to make the contract or to comprehend the contract, or just tips and tricks for situations when you are around contract. And then I will take up as many questions as I can. Okay. So, सबसे पहली tips and tricks is always make a contract for everything. Even when friends do work for you, make sure you make a contract, because ये आपको बहुत सारी unnecessary stressful situations से protect करेगा, और ऐसी बहुत सारी conversation जो आप शायद जो जरूरी conversations हैं but आप नहीं कर रहे हो, वो करने का आपको एक platform देगा. दूसरा, when you are making a contract, keep it as simple as possible and with clarity. See, like I said, that whenever you are drafting a contract, a lot of the times the parties that are involved in the contract, they actually, there might be linguistic barriers, there might be basic understanding barriers. कुछ भी reason हो सकता है जिसकी वजह से the other person cannot interpret and comprehend it, because of which the relationships might become sour at a later stage. So it is always advisable, and this is what I personally also practice, is to keep the contract clear, simple, and very brief. Don't always see, sometimes it is a necessity to get into a longer agreement. जब relationships complicated होते हैं, बहुत सारे factors लाने होते हैं, but if you can keep it small and simple, choose that, because then सब कुछ clearly defined होगा, situations आपको पता होंगे, सबके रोल्स एंड रिस्पॉन्सिबिलिटीज सबको पता होंगे, क्या कंसिडरेशन देना है, किन सिचुएशंस में देना है, वो सब क्लियर होगा. सेकेंड थिंग, यू ऑलवेज हैव अ स्कोप टू नेगोशिएट. Please, whenever you get a contract, if there is something that you don't like, or if there is something that you feel is different from the discussion that you had, or if there is something that you feel you cannot fulfill or should not be there in the contract, please go back and speak to the other party with whom you are getting into the professional relationship. There is always, whenever a contract is made, nobody is going to put a gun on your head and say कि इसी को sign करना है. They always have scope of negotiation. If you can give reasonable reasons for excluding a particular clause or including a particular clause, it usually happens. So never be afraid of negotiating. Another thing that you guys need to know is that understand that negotiation does not mean that you are letting go of opportunity. Because what I have seen is a lot of people and a lot of parties, especially in this industry, don't come back because they feel कि if they will go back to negotiate, तो opportunity चला जाएगा. No, that doesn't happen. Okay, yes, it is real that the industry is highly competitive, but at the same time, the opportunity that you are getting is not going to go away just because you have negotiated on the contract. When you negotiate, when you say negotiation, or when you go back with something, it simply means that you are requesting what you want, and ultimately coming down to a win-win situation and a mutual understanding between the parties, and incorporating that in the contract. Fourth, poorly drafted contracts may not provide a clear roadmap for the resolution of a certain stressful events. So make sure that the way you can comprehend and interpret your contract exactly in the manner you think it is made. So whatever is the relationship between the parties, make sure your contract clearly, it can be interpreted only interprets that exact relationship that you are getting into and not anything else. So it's better when you are drafting a contract, don't leave loopholes, don't use a vague language, and don't beat around the bush. Clearly say what you want to say, and always proofread it before sending it out or before signing it. Whenever you have drafted something, this is a practice that I have actually picked up from a lot of good contract drafters around me, is that whenever initially I realized that initially when I used to draft a contract, no matter how good I am with language, there were always certain errors that I would make in the contract while drafting it, or I would leave certain pointers. So what I have started, this is a very good advice that a fellow lawyer has given me, is whenever you make a contract, after drafting it, just close it. Don't think about it, don't do anything, and take a 1 hour break from that document. After 1 hour, go back to that document and start reading it. When you will do that, you will figure out कि अच्छा ठीक है कहाँ पे वो vague हो रहा है, या if there is something that you have missed, or if there are grammatical errors, so that will become a better contract and a more clearer version of it. Another thing, miscellaneous or standardized provisions can materially differ from your expectations. कई बार क्या होता है, when you get a contract in your hand, you will just read the main clauses, and जो miscellaneous clauses होते हैं या last के boilerplate clauses होते हैं, you leave it. Don't do that, because a lot of times what happens is there are certain more things included in these miscellaneous. जब भी हमें कुछ ऊपर नीचे करना होता है, we'll do it in these clauses. So make sure that you're reading those miscellaneous clauses and you're not leaving them out. Another very important thing, read and understand each and every clause. Never sign straight away. Take your time to comprehend it, and if possible, sleep over it once before signing it. Ask questions no matter how simple they are. It is okay to ask questions. It is normal to ask questions. Just because I understand something doesn't mean that everybody else would. Sometimes what happens is, while drafting, okay, now this is a very common thing that happens, and we often look around it, is that while drafting, I will draft it in a manner it is going on in my head. But maybe when the other party, because this happens with me a lot, but when the other party reads it, the interpretation of it might be a little different. That happens because maybe there is a communication gap, or maybe I am comprehending a particular relationship in a different manner from you. So if at the end of the day, parties who are going to sign the agreement, they are going to be obligated by that agreement. So if there is something that you're not understood, or if you're sometimes another thing that happens is parties often interpret a particular clause in a different manner. You write something, उसको interpret अलग तरीके से कर लेते हैं, जैसे कि अक्सर damages और indemnity में confuse हो जाते हैं, या कई बार scope of work में कोई चीज क्यों लिखी हुई है उसमें confuse हो जाते हैं, या अक्सर a lot of parties come back to me on things like when I say that okay, creative decision making rights will be with this party, or you can make changes to that work. So a lot of times people come back to me saying that अरे changes तो फिर हम कितने भी changes करते रहेंगे. Does that mean we'll have to change the entire script, or does that mean we'll have to do changes here and there, or based on so things like this. If there is some word, or if there is certain legality that you're not understanding, please go back and ask questions. Nobody is going to judge you on that. And last and final thing, preferably take legal advice and assistance. See, I'm not saying this because I'm a lawyer. I'm saying this because legal, when you go to somebody who's legal, they have been trained to do this particular thing. They understand the nitty-gritties of it, unlike nobody else. And अगर एक Google template से सारे जवाब मिल जाते, तो फिर सब कुछ आप template पे कर ले. See, every situation is different. There cannot be any set rule in this industry. When it comes to contracts, you should always, every relationship is new, every case is new, every project is new, and you will have with the same person, you can have different relationship at different time period, in different circumstances, in different projects. So make sure that you take a legal advice, because then they can they can help you and advise you on a lot of legalities that you might overlook. So that is why it is always good to take legal advice and assistance when it comes to drafting a legal contract. So with this, I bring an end to my presentation. There is an email ID out there which you can answer to, and I am stopping to share the slides so that I can take up the questions if I may. Thank you. Yes.
So there were two questions. I think more than there are. I think 3-4 questions. There are some which came via YouTube also. Tonyji, do you want to ask them?
Yeah, okay. So the first question is from Pushpendra on YouTube. Basically, I think let me get to the gist of the question. I think he wants to know that is there any special paper that is used for these contracts, or a plain paper is good enough? I mean, is there a legal paper? Like sometimes you have to do a contract on a stamp paper, in certain cases. Now, in media entertainment, does it follow any different system, or a plain paper will also do?
See, sometimes it depends. Sometimes you go on a plain paper and a letterhead, and sometimes you go on a stamp paper. Usually, the trend is that if it involves huge amount of money, or if the relationship is very complicated, they generally choose a stamp paper. But then, if not, they generally choose a different paper. But it is always advisable to go on a stamp paper, because then that will give an evidentiary value to your contract.
Okay. Then there is a question from, again on YouTube, from Skyboy. That's the ID. If I was, I'm just going to read it verbatim. Let's see if we can understand this. If I was an intern in a company, and during the end days of the contract, I have discussed with them that I will work further and extend the internship.
Okay.
But I didn't feel like working after the contract ended. Did not sign a new contract and denied that I will not work further. Is this a violation? They did not even draft any new contract when the contract ended, and I told them I would not work.
Yeah, so in that situation, see, there is no, neither is there a written contract, nor is there an implied contract. It was just a discussion where you said that you might want to continue working with them, but since you did not like the place, you just ended. So your initial term of the internship is usually 1 month or 2 months. Once you run that course of term, it ends there. If you want to work further, there will always be a clear. Sometimes it might also happen that you might want to work with the other person, but maybe due to some reason they can't accommodate you, so they will deny it. So there will always be an acceptance or denial from the other side. Till the time it's discussion, that's okay.
All right. Then there's a question from Lee. I think Lee is with us on Zoom. Sir, can you find out where Lee is, and if you can switch on their camera, then maybe we can highlight them. For someone who is just starting their career as a freelancer, is there any standard that we can follow while making contracts? I mean, I guess.
See, there is no standard which you can actually, there is no rule book, there is no standard, but yes, you can always, the clauses that are discussed are normally the important clauses. So make sure that your contract has what is the scope of work, what is being paid, the indemnity clauses, the term, the termination, all of those things are included.
Okay. Upamanyu is also here. Could we highlight Upamanyu? Upamanyu asks that when starting out, an artist may find mounting litigation against a defaulting party to be too difficult, even if a valid contract was in place, right? It's a very valid question, in fact. In your experience, what are the costs on average for recovering defaulted payments? How long could the process take? And how often are outcomes favorable? At what point should someone just cut their losses and put it down to experience? I think it's a very beautiful question, because this is something that a lot of people face, right?
It's a very beautiful question. It's a very I think it is the pain point of our industry in today's days. But at the same time, there is no standard or specific answer to this question also. It completely depends on your relationship with the other person. It completely depends on what you want to do. Because sometimes what happens is, litigation is okay. You can try every possible remedy. There are, before getting into litigation, there is always different remedies that are available to you. You can always go back to those remedies based on the wrong or the violation that has happened. Sometimes you might need to take a call to either continue it or to stop it. If you are getting into a litigation, uh, how long will it take? No answer. What will be the outcome? Again, no answer. The outcome will completely depend on how well you argue your case. Second, how good are your evidences? Like, if your argument and evidences are good, if you have somebody who's legally trained and good in arguments, it might go into your favor. But at the same time, there might be something that the other party comes in front with which is not in your favor, and it can go into completely different thing. How long does it take? See, usually in India, sadly, the judicial system is such that once you get into litigation, it takes time, because then there are appeals also that follow with the court order. So, as a matter of practice, industry patrons, and especially if you're new in the industry, uh, litigations is something that you would want to avoid. And to do that, that is why it is better to have a contract in place, because then you will also have an option of arbitration. Let's say if there is a dispute that is arising, you have an arbitration. Now, arbitration is a time bound thing. If you want to go into an appeal after an arbitration result, then there are very limited pointers on which you can get into appeal, right? And most of the time, what has happened is, I'm talking about this industry. If you look at the trend, a lot of the situations have been handled by an out of court settlement, or at arbitration stage it has been resolved. This has been a recent trend. You can pick it up since last. You can see the trend of past 5-6 years. This has happened. So they want to avoid litigation as much as they can. But having said that, there are situations where you need to get into litigation. Situations like piracy cases, situations like infringement of IP rights, situations like where something was plagiarized and the credit was not given. So in these situations, you make a choice of litigation, and thankfully, we are at a good place today, because we have seen a lot of, really, in past few years, we have seen really good judgments pertaining to media industry, where a lot of laws have been interpreted very nicely, very correctly, and those judgments have actually became the norm of the industry. So it is a choice that you have to make, and there is no set answer to this. I hope I
Okay.
was able to answer this question. Yes.
So, all right. So, if there are no more questions from the audience, I've got a few lined up. So, I mean, I don't want to like take the all the questions. So, if
Somebody
anybody's
has
got, if someone
somebody
else has
has-
got any questions, please. I mean,
yes,
okay, we've got
Yes,
Datta
Datta Prasad.
Prasad who's raised his hand. You don't have your video on, Datta Prasad, and you are on mute. Can you please unmute yourself? Yes. Go ahead, please.
Hi.
Hi.
So my question is regarding just one thing that I was in contract with somebody for a while, and
Mhm.
then I failed to communicate in between while the contract was still ongoing. Though we
Mhm.
have completed the major part of the contract, but the distribution part of the contract is something that was my responsibility. But also there we can, if we go by that, there are faults in both the parties. Like they couldn't adhere to some of their responsibilities while I couldn't. So while I want to establish connection again and I want to
Mhm.
go forward, is there a way that we can redraft the contract while keeping the original one intact, or
Yes.
we can modify the contract and then,
Yes.
because
There's always
there
a
are certain considerations were not
see
made
what.
while.
Okay. In this situation, one thing that you need to check is, normally your contract will have a clause called amendment to the contract. So you can invoke that clause wherein you can keep the main clauses the way it is and just change those certain clauses. Now, this clause, if you have to change the entire agreement, then I will advise it's better to get into a new agreement with these parties with just the limited scope of work which is there. Or if you want to change a lot of things, but if there are certain portions of it that you want to amend, you can always invoke that clause, add an addendum to the contract, and just go ahead.
Okay, that answers the question. Thank you.
All right. Anybody else has got a question? Someone wants to ask? No? We don't see any hand here. Okay, so I'm just going to quickly, ask you. Okay, Dr. Bhaskar has raised his hand, so please
Yes.
let's get Dr. Bhaskar. You're on mute, doctor.
Yeah, thank you.
Yes, please carry on.
I actually that is a very simple one kind of query. That is not a question. Actually, when we apply some kind of the project to like ministry, okay. So that is the based on some animation film or like some kind of the entertainment related type of thing. So that time government has given some kind of instruction. So as a like me, when I take any kind of the projects from the government, so that time is it possible to create from my side any contract or something with the government?
Sir, I'll have to check that because see, this is a very project to project basis. Because there are certain situations where government comes up with a lot of, let's say, for example, in case of animation, they will say that okay, these are the set of projects for which we want certain people to do it. They will collaborate, and for that project, they will have a standard document, and they will tell everybody that this is the standard document. We are open to negotiation. You can come negotiate and we can go ahead with it. But this is the standard document that we'll go ahead. Okay, but then there are some times where, and I'm talking this specifically with relation to the projects which are for the media and entertainment industry. But sometimes there are certain situations where you collaborate with the government and you say that okay, we will creatively try to advertise these things on your behalf. So in those situations, you can always have a draft from your end, or you can always request the government to get into a contract.
Okay, so that seems that when we send that any proposal or something, so that time from our side we prepare some kind of the instruction, right? So that's the only one options over there, right?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you.
Anytime.
All right. Sir, मैं पूछूं? Okay, so very quickly, one is when you talked about the non-disclosure, agreement or the non-disclosure clauses that are coming. You mentioned a very interesting point that we should always try and make sure that it runs both ways, and it's a two-way street that always have either party will be safeguarded or either party will not disclose, so that it's a fair clause. But how do you prove that the breach happened because of me? It says that if you cause a damage, then you will have to indemnify and so on and so forth. But the point is that how do you physically prove that I was the one who leaked the information out?
Okay, now this is actually a very difficult thing to do, but if in any manner the company can trace it back to you, then it can be. So with a series of a lot of evidences, maybe any phone call, maybe any emails that you send out, or any information. See, if you leak the information to somebody, you will do it in some form. Or maybe let's say you tell me something which is a confidential information. I go to the production house and I say that this person told me this thing. So if the simple answer is the party, if you have to invoke breach of confidentiality, the party will have to trace the leak back to you. It can be in any form. It can be anybody telling you. It can be. This happens a lot of times. There is a very interesting intellectual property which is absolutely not related to this industry, but I'll still talk about it. It's trade secrets. So trade secrets is basically things like we often say ki, "Arey, this recipe of the burger is a trade secret." How Coca-Cola is made, nobody knows, because the recipe is a trade secret. So it's a very, so any trade secret simply means any secret because of which you're there in the trade, and that secret has to be very strongly safeguarded. And recently, a lot of times information leak happens on a lot of websites that we go upon. So in those situations, whosoever has leaked the information, they have to trace it back to them. Just like in cases where piracy has happened. So piracy is actually leak of the confidential information, can be said. So I have to trace it back to the person I'm accusing the leak that this person has accused. So if I can do that, I can prove it.
Yeah, so basically the point being that the mere fact that it says that if you do this, then we will take damages from you is not as simple as that. Even if you're claiming damages or somebody else is
You have
inflicting damages, you have to
yes,
prove that this
yes.
was the person because of which it happened, right?
See, a crime has to be proved always. Otherwise, it is just an allegation.
All right. Okay. Second question that I have is that this is a hypothetical situation. A friend of mine who's joined me here, comes from him. That supposing there is a project that I am working on as an independent artist, or maybe even as an employee.
Okay.
All right.
Okay.
I have a contract in place with party X. The project that party X is doing or is undertaking is actually an illegal project, and I don't know about it. Let's say it's the plagiarized project. Let's say intellectual property rights have been run over, something that they have done which is illegal, but I am not in the know of it, right? I
Okay.
have my
Okay.
contract with these people saying that. Now,
Hmm.
assuming tomorrow they get into trouble because they are actually committing an illegal act, right?
Hmm.
Are my rights with them safeguarded, or do I also go into the tube with them?
Two things. One, see, if the other person, जिसके rights violate हुए, if they have to drag you to the court, they will do that. The point over here is how can you defend yourself? Two things that will help you. One, there is a section called representation and warranties, जहाँ पे आप बहुत clearly, and also जब आप IP rights का clause पढ़ोगे, उसमें अक्सर लिखा होता है that whatever IPs are being created, they are original. So warranties and representations are something which is an obligation that you're putting. So it's an obligation that the IP that you are creating is original. So then in that case, if you knew, or basically if the other person can prove that you knew it's an infringed work, so then you will have to pay the damages. If not, then you are safeguarded.
No, the
Through,
point is
let's
not
say,
about the person. Sorry, the point is not about the person who is doing the infringement. The point is, look at it like a worker, right?
okay.
A worker is working on a project. The project is between A and B, right? The
Acha,
worker is
okay.
the worker is contracted by A, right?
To
Now
perform the
A
task.
to perform the task. So the worker has a contract with party A, right? Now party A is doing something that is illegal. The worker doesn't know about it. And now
Okay.
party B drags A to court or does litigation or asks for damages. Now, does the worker also get wrapped up in that? Or the worker is indemnified that, look, I didn't know that this was illegal. I'm just doing an activity for which I'm being paid, and here's my contract.
I think Ishita her video has frozen.
My God, I didn't realize the question was that deep.
Yeah. I think even Aditya has a question now.
Yes, Aditya has also got a question here. All right, we just give her a second before she joins back in. Thankfully, this time her internet connectivity has been much better than the last.
Right.
All right, I just hope that she hasn't lost electricity there.
Yeah, she's dropped out now.
Yeah.
Meanwhile, there's Govindji back with us for the second edition. And Ishita is also back.
Yes, I am back. I am so sorry. This is like a shagun that has to happen once in my presentation. I am so sorry. Yes. Yes, sir. Going back to your question.
Yeah. So I don't know whether you got all of it. I'm going to very simplify it very, as much as possible and very quickly. A and B are engaged in some work.
Done.
A hires an external worker, does a contract with that external worker. Let's say I'm that external worker, right?
Okay.
Now, I have a contract with A. I don't know that A is doing something illegal. I have no clue about it. I'm just providing my services and I have a proper contract with him which safeguards all my rights, right? Now, B goes ahead and does some litigation on A saying that you have basically, you've done some theft, you've done some infringement, whatever the hell it is. That's a fight between them. Now, let's say A is proven to be guilty. What is my situation in that as an external, person? I mean, am I safeguarded, or are my rights also gone? Have I lost all my rights for payment, for enforcement of the contract? Because now there is a legal activity that's going on, right?
Okay, one usually consideration in situations may becomes a little difficult because party A will say that, oh, we already have litigation going on or whatever, or they will pay you. They will quietly pay you for the services that you have done. Okay, so your rights of payment will remain for that contract. Okay, but the fact that the liability will not come onto you because you had no idea that whatever work you're doing is actually illegal. So most of the time the liability does not come into you by the simple virtue that you had no idea about it. Okay, and as far as your consideration is concerned, okay, this is a practical thing that I've seen कि जब ऐसी situations होती हैं जहाँ पे कोई illegal activity होती है तो चुपचाप सबके जो लोग involved होते हैं in doing that thing, they are usually paid so that they don't rattle much about it. And उनके जो confidentiality clauses होते हैं, अगर आपको पढ़ोगे, sometimes you can make out that there is something wrong with this because confidentiality obligations goes way beyond the normal confidentiality clauses in the agreement. Because then there'll be things like that you cannot talk about this agreement at all. You cannot talk about the engagement at all. See, it's okay to tell the other person that you cannot divulge the details of the contract. But you cannot stop someone from telling you कि आपका उनके साथ engagement है. But I'm not saying कि जिन situations में ऐसा होता है वो हर situation illegal है. But what I'm saying is कि generally जब illegal चीजें हो रही होती हैं तो one, सब कुछ बहुत शांति से हो जाता है. Two, confidentiality obligations are way beyond what the normal confidentiality obligations are. I'm talking about the contractual obligations. So yes.
Excellent. Okay, Aditya, you've got a question. Aditya, can we see have your camera? I think he's traveling. So go ahead, just fire away.
Hello. Yeah, I'm sorry, I'm not able to switch on my camera.
So go ahead. Go ahead.
First of all, thank you, Tasi and Isheta, for this wonderful couple of sessions. It's been really helpful. Just for my question, I want to take this a little bit away from contracts and more towards copyright infringement. So currently in this new technological, new digital world, what is happening, one example is we have Instagram pages where someone is taking a snapshot of my artwork, putting on his page, and he's taking snapshots of many popular artists and putting it on his page, and he the purpose of their page is just to popularize give a better reach to these artists of this media. That's what they say. And they are not exactly selling the artwork, but I think the way they get paid, at least on Instagram, is by if you have too many followers, you can do some paid advertising or something so they are not directly selling my artwork, but still they are commercializing my work and a lot of other people's work which they did not create. And if I'm creating something, it takes time. So I cannot post as regularly as those guys. So in a way, I cannot have as many followers as those guys. So this is creating a weird conundrum where I don't know, I think you get the point.
Okay,
And this has now, sorry, Yeah,
Yes, yes,
nothing.
continue.
This has just become even more confusing and complicated with the NFT space. So I just wanted to know what your thoughts are.
Okay.
And
So, Aditya, what I will say is, see, this is a very different conversation altogether, which will take a lot of time. So, what I will suggest you is, with the due respect to Tasi, and if I have the permission, what you can do is you can write this thing to me, or we can connect after the session gets over, and we can discuss over it, and I can just explain it to you, because there are many factors. Like if I start explaining them, it might be confusing for other people who are listening to this thing, because there are a lot of nitty gritties involved, different parameters. There is an if and but to everything. So I'll have to connect those dots to you in a different manner.
sure, I understand.
Okay, we can
But I think it
like
would be helpful to others as well. So if the organizers could
like I
find a way
said.
out, then I think if you find the question helpful, then I think we can find a way out.
Yeah, sure. So here's the thing on this, that Ishita had proposed a special session which would be dedicated purely to Q&A. And you can bring in whatever question you have, which could be specific, it could be general, it could be just information that you want, anything that covers either the two sessions that we've had, topics that she has discussed in those two sessions, or otherwise as well. Now, it all depends on how much is the interest for the third session, because she has to take time out from her schedule and we have to organize it. But this is definitely one of the things that could be done. Other than that, yes, what you could definitely do, Aditya, is that Ishita is available on the email IDs that she said, and also on the chat we said legal@tassionline.org. You can definitely write into her or even connect with her on her, on whatever mode of communication, and at least get your queries sorted. And then probably we'll find a way to kind of, share that information with everyone else as well.
Perfect. That will be great. Thank you.
Yes,
Awesome.
she has posted both the email IDs on the
Yeah.
chat. You can see that.
Right. Right. Okay. So I guess, I mean, it's been a lovely session as expected. In fact, more than what was expected. And I'm sure everyone here is, learned quite a lot. I have definitely, I mean, a string of questions. Still a lot many more questions, but I think positive time. So we'll take those offline. If you can switch on your cameras, Vaibhavji will quickly highlight and spotlight each one of you, and you can say hi, and then we will wrap up for the evening and get on to our, respective weekend programs. So that's
Bhaskar.
Vaibhavji, all yours.
Yeah. So we have Bhaskar on screen. Bhaskar, you're currently at IIT Guwahati, right?
No, I am just right now at the stage.
Okay.
Means before 1 hour.
Okay.
Yeah. So actually, it's national conference is going on.
Okay.
That IIT Guwahati is a very big conference. So me and my students has given few research activity work.
Great.
So that is a bit presented over there.
So thank
So
you
actually,
for joining. And you are on a long walk during the session. we could enjoy the walk through your camera.
Yeah.
So thank you.
Complete driving, and that is a very good for me.
Right. Thanks,
Okay,
Bhaskar.
actually, yeah, and that session is very good because in between I just joined that too, and it's very nice. Like my few students is engaged on that platform. Right now, I just take it up to those people, and definitely the sessions is very impactful to everyone. Very impressive. The way of style and everything is very good. And another point is that I am just today I registered in sitting in IIT Guwahati design department, and I just registered my membership in this group.
Wow. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you.
There's Govindji. Thank you once
Thank
again.
you. Thank you very much. I think it was a very enlightening session. In fact, both the sessions that she took. And Ishitaji, thank you very much. It was a very, very good session. And it will be, I think, in short period, it will contribute a lot to our understanding of the law and whatever we are doing. But I definitely appreciate Tasi and you and everybody. Wonderful. It's been a wonderful session.
Thank
Thank
you
you
so
so
much.
much, sir. We are honored. We are really honored. I am personally very honored. Thank you so much for attending and for the
No,
kind words
thank
that
you.
you said
It
in
was
the previous and this.
it was really very, very good. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Then there is Upamanyu. Upamanyu, Calcutta?
Calcutta, yeah.
And then there is Datta Prasad. Datta Prasad, where are you based?
I'm from Pune,
Okay.
and yeah, that's
Thank you.
been great. The weather is good, and there are some good plans, and the session is always great. Thank you, Isheta. Thank you, Tasi. And it's always good to see Govind sir. It's all come
Right.
together. So thank you.
And there's Biju.
Hello, sir. Good evening.
Good evening. And thanks, Biju, for joining us again.
Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir. It was a wonderful section. Thank you, ma'am.
That's me. And I'll put this on gallery mode now. So
Yes, so just a couple of quick announcements before we leave. We are definitely looking forward to, please do spread the word. We're definitely looking forward to the physical edition of Anifest India this year again.
Okay.
Hopefully with the the COVID restrictions being lifted and things normalizing, we do hope to be back with the physical edition sometime in the later half of the year. So a request to all of you that if you have ideas or suggestions of sessions like these which you would like to see being showcased at the festival, please do write into us. Also send us feedback of the sessions. And like I said, this has also been recorded. It will be on our archives in the YouTube channel. So any of your friends, colleagues who missed out on it, please point them to it. There are this session, the previous one, and many more other sessions that have already been put up there on the YouTube channel. It's a repository of a lot of interesting knowledge. And watch out for the website for the next session that we'll be announcing very soon. Apart from that, do encourage people to kind of register with us and join these sessions, because it's very rare that you get an opportunity to discuss issues both from an art, craft, or a technical standpoint. And we've always tried to bring interesting speakers which can really help us as artists as a community. So thank you all once again for giving us time on a Saturday evening. But I'm sure it was very well spent, and it'll only help us going forward. Thanks to all of you, and hope to catch you back again soon. Bye-bye.
Thank
you,
you very
Isheta.
much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And we'll announce the episode 3 very soon,
Yeah.
Sure.
where all your queries will be answered.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ishita ji.